Ladies and gentlemen, in this RedGaming.com video, we're going to be talking about the future of AAA production. Electronic Arts, Wargaming, and even Peter Molyneux have all started to voice their opinions on the subject. Now, AAA games, as you know, to many people, are becoming a situation where they're not really sure if it can continue. Developers are becoming increasingly worried, as well as publishers, of course, that if you have a certain project, it may cost 20, 30, 100 million, in some cases more, to create the project, and then it could simply not be financially viable. And if so, then of course you've lost a huge chunk of cash. So, they've been asked a certain question, a very simple one actually. Are AAA titles becoming, well, untenable? Is it an unsustainable business model to continue forward? And as I said, they've weighed in, and here's their responses. I would firmly discourage anyone from considering AAA a substitution for quality. It's not like developers or free-to-play games are saying, we couldn't do AAA, it's free. What do you expect? That's simply not the case. These comments come to us from the CEO of Wargaming.net. He also added to this, with Minecraft, people don't care about 3D, it's pixels, but it's taking the world by storm. These games may not be AAA looking, but their market segment tolerates this. It's all about the fun experience. This is a whole new world, not a black and white one. No matter what, no matter how much I consider myself to be the pioneer of free-to-play games, I cannot say, you're not free-to-play, you'll just fail. This monetization method is just a concept which helps games to reach more people and to be more successfully commercially. I'm not saying the graphics can be shitty or your server connection can have problems. It all has to still be beautiful. Looking specifically at hardcore gamers, the answer is yes. Games have to be AAA and free to play. Don't trade one for the other. Meanwhile, Richard Hillerman from Electronic Arts says, and I quote, "What is true today is that there are fewer AAA games being built at the same point in the previous generation. I've done some calculations and that say there are about 125 teams in the industry worldwide working on what I'd call AAA games on a console. That was 7 or 8 years ago. That number today is south of 30, probably in the 25 range. What's interesting is that if you look at the composition of those teams, the numbers are exactly the same. Those 125 teams become 25. The size of the teams increased by a factor of 4. This is everything to do with the standard definitions to HD change. If you look at the math, the change is about context, richly about content, and as we evolved, our costs went substantially up. And the number of people in the teams of what these kind of visions went up by necessity. I don't see that kind of content-orientated challenge coming in this generation of platforms. As a result, I think we were on the path that made me nervous, but it seems to have stabilized." What exactly does he mean by that, I hear you cry, because it's kind of a complicated statement. And it basically, he figures that, look, the difference between standard definition, in other words, say the PS2 era to PS3 era, was substantial. All you have to do, for confirmation on the difficulties of HD titles and the inherent problems within them, is look at Nintendo. Nintendo themselves have stated a couple of times that one of the problems they had, one of the reasons that their titles have fallen behind schedule, is simple. They honestly didn't realize that creating titles in HD was an issue, right? Because HD, if you actually look at the definition, for most people, it's simply an increase in pixels. In other words, the title comes from, say, 480p to say 720 or 1080p, just for example. However, the reality is, if that's all there was to it, no one would give a rat's ass. There's a hell of a lot more that goes into it, including better shadows, better, of course, quality of models, and much more besides, because if all there is just more pixels on the screen, it doesn't really make it that look that much better. I mean, let's face it, the PC has had HD for a long time. I mean, just for example, if you really want to, you can go back and run something like, say, Quake 2 in HD, in 1080p. It's completely and utterly viable, it's completely and utterly doable, and it does work. And, yes, of course, it looks a bit smoother or whatever, but the reality is, the textures don't look better. The problem is creating those better textures, creating those better models and so on, is becoming increasingly expensive. There are so many texture artists and so on that work on these titles, and I believe it was even Microsoft that said that a lot of the budget, a lot of the people who are working on these games now are actually graphics artists, so the actual artists who are creating the title, and animators and so on. Indeed, most of the time the programmers, obviously they've increased, but nowhere near to the degree, the percentage, as what you're seeing in terms of the artists. So what about Peter Molyneux? Peter Molyneux is a man with many opinions, and he has said, and I quote, no, absolutely not. I just think, like any proper industry, we are diversifying. And in diversification, it doesn't mean that a person playing a tablet game is going to kill off AAA gaming. I do think that AAA gaming is going to have to go through reinvention at some time or another as to how it monetizes itself, because at the moment AAA gaming is based around a retail release at a specific time. That model we start to question a little bit because retailers are increasingly challenged in the digital world. The other reason that the challenge to the model is the big problem with AAA gaming is that there isn't enough of it. As a consumer, I don't want to wait 9 months for my AAA title to hit. Gaming needs to get to a rhythm like cinema does. Hollywood goes on a very good job of always having something exciting for us to go and see. Hollywood has this system where they release according to the calendar the whole year. In the gaming industry, we tend to just focus on holidays. All the titles come out in the holiday season. And I think that we have to give our AAA gamers a reason to keep playing throughout the whole of the calendar year. But I think it's here to stay. It's definitely healthy, and I think we're going to have to reinvent itself digitally. AAAs are becoming very stable, very defined, and we have to know the audience we're appealing to. And if you just make a hit, you're going to get 10, maybe 20 million playing that game, so I don't think it's going to die. Whether we think 3 console manufacturers or 2, even 1, whether there should even be examples of the League of Legends, World of Tanks, which are more free-to-play equivalent of AAA gaming, I think we should probably do. And so it's just going through an evolution. Really, mobile is like TV and AAA gaming is like films. I'm sure that if we go around in Hollywood boardrooms when TV started to become prevalent, I'm sure they probably said, this is the death of cinema, but it wasn't. It was just meant it had to adapt. So, out of quote, of course, what are my thoughts on this? Well, it's very hard to argue that AAA titles are dying when you have a title like, say, Grand Theft Auto 5. And that's made about 800 million in the first day of release. Now, I don't care what industry you work in, 800 million. Now, obviously that's not profit because the game costs just under 200 million to produce and market and everything, but still, I don't think anyone can say that, well, basically 4 times profit is shabby. And that's the first day. Let's just, emphasize this. There's people out there who haven't bought the copy yet, they've not had time, they're in school, they're working, they want to wait till this weekend, they, didn't have the cash, they're waiting for payday, whatever the reason. Maybe, their console's broken and they're trying desperately to get a new one, maybe they're waiting for the PC version, whatever bloody reason it is, it's not like this is all the games is going to sell. The problem for many people, of course, and there's numerous reasons cited for this, including piracy, including free-to-play games, including tablets, including mobile phones, including indie titles. There are so many different reasons and so many different theories that AAA titles are going to go the way of the dodo. Cliffy B, for example, has said that, look, games just can't keep going like this. You can't keep having a situation where titles become increasingly expensive. To be honest with you, from the perspective of someone who's very interested in technology, for example, the PlayStation 4 and the Xbox One, it doesn't particularly take a technical genius to realize that the primary reason that Mark Cerny and Microsoft and all the other people who have been involved in the next generation consoles have done what they've done is to reduce costs, right? We know, for example, that the previous generation of consoles were using RISC processors. They were using, PowerPC type of architectures. The PlayStation 3, of course, was using Cell, but at the end of the day, it was still Power architecture, right? Obviously, it had some major differences in terms of the actual layout of the hardware, with the SPEs and so on, but still. And the fact of the matter is, it cost money for them to actually do this. And the problem when you're doing this is twofold. For AAA developers, it adds time. It adds time to basically launch the game. In other words, from getting something that's a conception on a whiteboard, or when they're just drawing out character designs, it takes time for them to do that, to actually putting them and render something on screen. Mark Cerny, I believe, calls this time to pixel. And back in the days of the PlayStation 2, they were very short. Now, I'm talking about this era, the PS3 era, they're very long, and simply because they're very hard to utilize. I mean, if you were to look at, say, Rockstar, they went through hell to get a parity between those two titles, between the Xbox 360 version and the PS3 version. It's just obvious. It's just, they had to go through hell and back because of the differences in the system, and we know that AAA games, in my opinion, sure, indie developers, they are going to benefit massively. Why? Because indie developers just don't have the budget. Let's say you and your buddy are creating a title. Let's assume that title is, a platform game, 2D platform game, and it's great, it's fun, it's imaginative. I'm not saying it's bad, but it's just you two that's created this thing, right? It's you and your buddy have done the programming and the graphic assets. Maybe you got another buddy to help out with their music or whatever. Maybe do some sound effects because they're good with the various applications to do that. You've got someone else to maybe help with suggestions with marketing or whatever, or maybe to do a bit of voice acting. But the reality is, primarily, it was just you two. Now, it's a pain in the butt to try and do this on a system that you're not familiar with. Chances are that if you're a programmer, for example, you're going to be infinitely more experienced with, say, x86 programming and architecture than what you are with, say, a PowerPC. I'm not saying you won't be, I'm not saying you couldn't get around it, but to get the most out of the system and to make a game that works well and not have any bugs, you want the system to be as smooth as possible, hence the next generation. Mark Cerny and his team, and Microsoft, of course, are echoing that. They are trying to become more PC-like. So, of course, there is going to be a lot of technology inside both systems. Whether we're talking about the cloud, whether we're talking about compute, whether we're talking about something completely different, there is a hell of a lot of technology there, but the reality of the matter is sometimes you just need a title to work, and quickly. Graphic artists and so on, yes, it's becoming increasingly difficult. Now, obviously, the thing is, the next generation of consoles, there is going to be a higher level of graphic fidelity, there's going to be better looking textures, there's going to be better lighting. We're going to expect titles to run at a steady frame rate, for example. And these are all different ways that people can go. But I think that we are in an age now where the tools are becoming a lot more mature. Engines are becoming a lot more mature as well, and our experience is becoming a lot better. Now, you've got to also remember that we're in an age of cross-generation. When the PS3 and PS4 are going to be coexisting on the shelf, there's going to have to be there for a while, and developers aren't necessarily going to release a AAA title on only one console. One of the reasons, other than third-party development, of course, first-party development. So, for example, the Sony and the Microsoft titles from, say, Naughty Dog or whatever. Most of those titles, if you're talking about Electronic Arts or whatever, they try to make sure that they're on as many platforms as possible to recuperate their losses. Because that's just really how it is. And so, to be honest, I completely agree with Peter. I mean, TV now is becoming really good. It doesn't take a particular, film connoisseur or TV connoisseur to look at the movies and look at the TV shows that are out there now. Game of Thrones, Dexter, Breaking Bad, and so many others that are just amazing. I mean, honestly speaking, TV now is becoming ridiculous. I mean, Breaking Bad, I don't think, the last couple of episodes that I've been watching, it's not quite finished at the time I'm recording this. I think it's 1 to 2 more episodes. And people are just going crazy over it. I mean, people love it. It's that simple. I mean, they were just going crazy. I mean, IMDb, the ratings for the show have just gone up through the roof. It's like, it's like they've been shot with with a turbo booster or something. It's just ridiculous. But still, TV isn't killing off movies, and that's the thing. AAA titles are still there. They're not going to be going, in my opinion. I think we're going to get this level of coexistence. I think it's still early. I think that one issue that people are going to have with AAAs comes down to how much work and what is the quality of that title. Now, for example, Rockstar with Grand Theft Auto, we know it's going to sell well. I don't think anyone really expected that game to sell poorly. I'm pretty sure if the critics had gotten hold of it, if, people like CVG and IGN and everyone, let's assume they gave the game a 6 out of 10, just for example. Let's say they'd even said it was awful. Let's say they gave it a 3 out of 10, because, it was technically bad, the writing was terrible, whatever reasons. Obviously never going to happen with a Rockstar game, but let's even go as far as to say that that was the case. It still would have made money. It still would have been a very big hit because of the amount of anticipation behind it, although it wouldn't, of course, made as much of a splash as what it did. People knew that Grand Theft Auto, I don't have a clue why I'm saying Gran Turismo, sorry guys. We know that Grand Theft Auto is going to sell extremely well, because it has an incredible history. It's the same with like Call of Duty and much more besides. You know the experience you're going to be getting. I'm aware that some people are cynical of AAA gaming now, and I agree that occasionally I am left with a little bit of a bitter taste in my mouth. Some AAA titles, they're not as good as what they should be. You feel that their stories may be a little bit rushed, maybe they're more linear than what you expect, and all of this, of course, is down to production costs, right? If artists and the games developers had their way, they'd not make a game so linear. They'd make it sprawling and whatever else. But reality isn't like that. And of course, there are finite amounts of money. And titles like, for example, GTA are a testament to what gaming can be, to what AAA development can be. But we cannot forget that some AAA titles haven't sold as well as what they should be. We know that companies, for example, like Capcom, are currently struggling a little bit. Now, we can cite numerous reasons for Capcom's issues, and Devil May Cry, for example, was highly anticipated upon its release. I think that we all know that it was one of those titles where people were nervous about it, because it was one of those titles that in the PS2 era kind of defined the machine. It was an amazing game. It really was. Like Devil May Cry, the original one, was easily one of my favourite titles, even though it was not exactly a launch PS2 game, but it was pretty much close to launch. It was basically Gen 1. And my goodness, it was an amazing game. It really was. It was fantastic. But this latest incarnation of DMC has upsetted people. And, that's the issue. It wasn't a bad game in my opinion, but, it... Resident Evil as well. This is a case of a AAA title. It was, it made its money, it did fairly well, but it didn't do as well as what Capcom hoped. And in my personal opinion, I think this is a case of, look, you spent all this money, and you can't really decide what the game was. And Capcom, in their defense, have held their hand up and said, look, we realize that we, didn't really do this Resident Evil as much of a service as what we should. we should have stuck more to the horror routes, and we're gonna, we're gonna fix this, and we're gonna improve for the next games. And I respect that. I respect a developer when they just hold their hand up and say, you know what, we realise that this didn't go according to plan. We apologise, and we're going to improve on it. I don't think that we're going to be seeing the death of AAA. I do think that we're going to be seeing a market of cheaper titles. I do think that titles do, just like Peter said, I think they need to be spread out much better throughout the year. It absolutely sucks that, say, for 3 months, you can have instances where there's no big AAA releases at all, and then you get pillaged over Christmas. That's not really how it's supposed to go either. Now, I can understand, of course, for something like a PlayStation 4 to be released at Christmas. It makes sense, right? Because, little Johnny wants it, and his mum says, I'll get it for you for Christmas, because that would happen regardless. It didn't matter if that sucker was released in March, Johnny would have to wait until Christmas. It's as simple as that, unless his birthday, and he was really, really lucky. Most people aren't going to splurge out in the middle of, the year for their kids, and that's understandable. However, we do know that most adults, a lot of adults now are playing games. In fact, for the most part, they're the ones who are making these expensive purchases, right? It makes sense because adult gamers now, think about it, let's say you started to game, even in the PS1 era, you're easily going to be, an adult. If you started to game even in the PS2 era, you're probably going to have your own job by now, you're going to start making some money. So most gamers now are maturer, and that's fine. That's good for the industry, in my opinion. It means that the gamers have more spending power. It means that titles can move forward, and it of course means that there's going to be more platforms in the market, more diverse platforms. DLC can also be a part of this, and I don't really have a problem with monetization in terms of DLC, for example, of AAA titles. Some people are really against it. I'm actually kind of for it, but with a caveat: not crap, right? That's the key. Not crappy DLC. A good DLC is, okay, we're going to give you guys a bunch of extra levels, or, we're going to give you guys some extra characters, for example. Whatever. That's good DLC. Another, say, 2 hours of gameplay for, £5, for example. That's good DLC. What's not good DLC are time trials. What's not good DLC is something that is like costumes, and they're going to charge you like £4, £5, £6, £7 for that thing, for a bunch of costumes. That's just trash, in my opinion, and I don't think that's good for the industry. I understand that from the developer's point of view, it's good, easy money, and that can help to facilitate development of other titles, but at the same time, I think there has to be a balance, and I don't necessarily know if that's always struck when it comes to DLC. I do understand, however, that the AAA development is becoming expensive. They do need to find a way to monetize the titles, and I have no problems with that. Just don't take the piss from the gamers, and I think you'll be much better off. With something like GTA, or even like other really big titles, like, for example, the Gears of War, and as much as some people may hate it, even Call of Duty, the fact of the matter is, that the game is going to be good. Okay, with COD, for example, you may argue that, it's maybe not as changed as what some people would hope, each iteration and so on, but at least for the most part, the gameplay is going to be pretty damn solid. I think we could all agree there's nothing worse than looking at a title and just thinking to yourself, How was this put together as a AAA game? It's just disappointing. There's nothing else to say about it. I don't expect AAA games to be perfect. That's not realistic, but I also think that we do need a level of quality. And I think as long as developers strive to push out the quality, as long as they're not churning out rubbish, and I don't think, to be honest with you, anyone wants to do that. I don't think Electronic Arts do, despite the fact that they are getting, snide comments and so on with their games, and as are other companies as well, to be fair. But I honestly do think, for the most part, they do want to put out the best product they can, because it only makes sense. For example, the whole COD versus Battlefield thing. It doesn't make sense for one of them to just say, okay, you know what, we're not going to try that hard on this because we know we're going to sell well anyway. Why? Because you can sell better. Because if you're number one, you have that prestige. If you're number one, you know that you're going to sell better for the next version. And so I think that, look, the bottom line is as well, these guys and girls are working hard on their titles, and I think for the most part, they want to make the best games possible for you. Why wouldn't you? If you're slogging, 2-3 years on a title in some cases, you're going to want to make sure that that game is the best quality you can. I think AAA is going to be around for a long time. I don't think that free games are going to get rid of it. I don't think mobile gaming is going to get rid of it. Same reason that I don't think that consoles are going to be disappearing anytime soon, or PC gaming is going to be disappearing anytime soon. I think that we're going to have situations where League of Legends and so on is going to, of course, attract people. But I don't necessarily know if it's going to attract people because it's free. I think it's going to attract people because it's free and therefore they get to try it and then they become addicted. But I think League of Legends would attract people even if it wasn't free. I think it's because people love the game, the same with Dota and so on. I'm not saying that obviously the fact it's not free isn't appealing. Obviously it is because you've got nothing to lose, but I don't think it's going to kill off AAA gaming. I think as long as the game's good, I think as long as the developers show love to the community and they respect the community and they do the best they can for the the title, and it's well written, it's well optimized, it plays well, and it's evident that the developers have tried their best with the title and that it's going to be a fun title. I don't think anyone's not going to buy AAA gaming. I think it will always sell well as long as sufficient marketing and so on is done, which is of course the key as well, right? And if all of that's done, if all of the titles sell well, then I don't really think it's too much of a big deal. That doesn't mean, of course, that they have the license to start, I don't know, charging more money for the game. That doesn't mean that I believe that a title that's AAA will always be successful, because of course that's not going to happen. There are going to be a couple of failures. However, I do think that developers do need to be more willing to undertake risks, and studios are becoming more like that. Electronic Arts, for example, has said that it's got some original IP in the works, which is great in my opinion. Mirror's Edge 2 is kind of a risky title, and if it doesn't work, you know what? At least they've tried, and I understand it can be a risky proposition when millions of dollars are on the line, but unfortunately you can't always have a great hit. Anyway, hopefully you've enjoyed the somewhat ranty video. Didn't really mean it to go on this long, but there you have it. Hopefully you've enjoyed it. I will see you soon. Take care. Bye for now.